This is part 3 of a 3-part series entitled Fukushima, the Principle of Emptiness, in which we are focusing on the terms in red and green. And if you have not watched part 1 and 2, please do. Part 1 is the introduction and the layout, and it also clears away a lot of generalized mistaken views about Buddhism. And part 2 is the actual look at the term emptiness and the term anatman. So if you have not watched part 1 and part 2, please go watch them. So now we will dive into part 3. So a final overview before we move on. Very quickly, just look at the screen and we'll go through it. Anatman and shunyata, they are related terms. In so many ways, they're the same thing. They're just different sides or different aspects of the same teaching or the same truth. They are both found in every school. Even though there's some misinformation that shunyata is only a Mahayana idea, that is misinformation. Shunyata is found even in the Pali Sutras. It is true that different schools over time expound more on each topic, and these further explorations of anatman and shunyata can become very complex and very esoteric. However, the fundamentals are always the same. Nagarjuna's middle way method, known as Madhyamaka, is found in most schools. It would have even been found in the so Nagarjuna actually started a school of thought, not so much a lineage per se, but a school of thought called Madhyamaka. That Madhyamaka methodology is present in pretty much all schools. Definitely in China, definitely in Japan, definitely in Tibet, Bhutan, etc., etc., etc. So, but since we're studying samurai writings, it absolutely would have been a factor in there. And for those of you still with the going on about the Pali stuff, yes, Madhyamaka almost certainly was there in the pre-1150s Theravada as well. It would have probably been something that they pushed out when they went ultra-reductivist. So obviously each school has their own history and their own interpretations and developments of Nagarjuna's teaching. So like, for example, in Tibet, they split the Madhyamaka into 2 different types, with Prasangika Madhyamaka being sort of the winner in terms of the preference. But again, all of that is ultimately irrelevant because we're looking at how it applies to samurai writings. And so we can be absolutely certain that the basic Madhyamaka, as per taught by Nagarjuna in his writings, would be the fundamental foundation for the middle way teachings that make their way into Tendai, Shingon, Chan, Zen, etc., 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 and so therefore would apply to samurai writings. So, and lastly, again, I'm calling on you guys to please ditch misunderstandings and misconceptions. Focus only on the things, on the actual teachings and the actual historical interpretations of the target group. So when you're analyzing Buddhist samurai manuals, or a samurai who's writing and he's using Buddhist terms and Buddhist ideologies, then don't focus on what they're teaching in Sri Lanka. Don't focus on what they're teaching in Bhutan. Just focus on what he would have actually been exposed to at the time. Okay, so now for anybody still watching, let's talk about how to integrate this information with the Fukushima scroll. Specifically, what are some things that we can now infer? Well, first off, the entirety of the Fukushima scroll, the author of the scroll, Nojiri Jiroemon, has a definitive Buddhist leaning. There are several Buddhist terms and Buddhist references through the entire scroll. There are some to be expected soft Shinto parts, but there are no hard Shinto parts. And what I mean by hard Shinto is as Shinto began to find its identity as an independent entity from Buddhism, you start to get some documents that go hard Shinto and start dropping Buddhism out. But and one of the things that helps date this document, one of the reasons when you look at this document, you can say, oh, this does look like it precedes a certain time period, that comes from a certain time period, there's no hard Shinto in the document. The document has a very Buddhist leaning. So not only does that help us sort of get an idea of confirming the date of the document, but at the same time, it lets us know the author is more influenced by Buddhism than by hard Shinto, so to speak. For example, the author says that you can accomplish your goals regardless of it, whatever regardless, you can accomplish your goals if you adhere to the principle of emptiness. He doesn't say that you can accomplish your goals by relying on magic. He doesn't say you can accomplish your goals by relying on gods, or by relying on the Tao, or by relying on star calculations, or by relying on ancestors. He specifically says you can rely on accomplishing your goals. You can accomplish your goals by relying on the principle of emptiness. That is a hard Buddhist statement. So we can know that the author, Nojiri Jiroman, when he's writing the scroll of refining intentions, we can say that's a hard Buddhist statement because he doesn't mention there's no hard Shinto, there's no hard Shinto, there's just hard Buddhism. So okay, this guy's Buddhist. Then the summary line, the part that was in green, the summary line says this scroll, which is referring specifically to the scroll of refining intention, is the root of shinobi. So now I've just explained Anatman to you, basic introduction and a basic introduction of emptiness. Of course, both of them get more complex, but fundamentally, you've been explained the fundamental introductions. And so now the author of the Fukushima scroll is telling you that the thing that you can rely on the most is the principle of emptiness. And then he turns around and says that what he just said, is the root of ninjutsu. So what he's saying is the principle of emptiness is the root of ninjutsu. So he's telling you, again, let me say that again, he's telling you that the root of shinobi is Anatman and Shunyata. And he's saying that victory will come not from binding yourself to any concepts or any forms, but victory comes from allowing your mind to be free of clinging to any sense of this is definitive or that is definitive. Right? And he's saying formlessness, adaptation, and freedom of thought is the root. But now let's be very, very clear. Don't be tempted to think that he means principle of emptiness as a non-religious term. In the last slide I just explained, first off, it would be silly because the amount of magic that is presented in the scroll is obviously a magic and religious scroll. So it would be a poor stance to say that it's a non-religious term because the whole scroll is about religion and magic. Then it would also be a very poor stance to take because, again, he could have used a dozen or so words to say adaptation or free flowing, right? But he didn't. He used a specific hard Buddhist term, principle of emptiness. Unmistakable Buddhist reference. It's a hard Buddhist. He's dropping a hard Buddhist term, so you can't say that it's not a religious term. Absolutely is a religious term. So again, if he didn't want to signal a Buddhist meaning, he would have just said it a dozen different ways. But by using principle of emptiness, he is unmistakably invoking the Buddhist teachings. And because he clearly signals a Buddhist meaning, we have to consider or integrate at least the fundamental definitions of Shunyata and Anatman into the implied understanding of the words he's using. Right? So in other words, he's using a Buddhist term. It's obvious he's meaning it as a Buddhist term. It's a religious term. So therefore, what does Buddhism teach about this term? We have to, at a minimum, apply the fundamentals of this term to the term. In other words, any attempt to try to avoid applying Anatman or Shunyata to this term is bad scholarship. Flat out. You have to apply Anatman and Shunyata, at least the fundamentals, to this term. Otherwise, it's poor scholarship. There's no other way to say it. You're making a huge mistake. And furthermore, as stated previously, it would not be in conflict with known history to do this application. We know for a fact that Shunyata and Anatman are a big fundamental part of Japanese schools, Japanese Buddhist schools, so there's no contradiction, right? The trick actually is to make sure that we do not include any modern day misunderstandings of Anatman and Shunyata, such as the modern misunderstanding of no soul, into this historical understanding. We must also not include any Buddhist developments that took place in other countries that simply would not, could not have been included either. So like I said, for example, we cannot include the Tibetan distinction between two types of Madhyamaka into this definition because Nojiri Jiroimon would never have known about those. Also, as I said, there are further and deeper looks at emptiness and Anatman that can get complex and esoteric. Absolutely. We have only scratched the surface on the fundamental basic meanings. But this video is absolutely already way too long. And also, we just won't do it because in the Bodhisattva vows, it's actually a violation to give those deep esoteric teachings on emptiness to those who are not ready. Right? So you actually break your Bodhisattva vows if you give those deep esoteric teachings of emptiness to those who aren't ready. So definitely we won't be going into them. First off, the video is too long and it would be a violation to go into them just on a video like this. So, but the good news is we really don't need to because fundamentally you have the information. You have the fundamental Anatman and the fundamental emptiness, and that is a good place to start. Hopefully we've cleared away the misconceptions and replaced them with more accurate information. So you've hopefully refined your understanding of what is being referenced here in the scroll. But what I do want to do is include just a few more additional details of the implications of emptiness. These are not the deep esoteric teachings, but these are a little bit deeper than just the fundamentals. And so you can apply these to Nojiri Jiroimon's scroll, such as the world and the beings contained within, they all appear and function, but in actuality they don't intrinsically exist. They exist relatively. They appear and they function, but upon examination they resolve into emptiness. One's personal identity is in constant flux. So do not attach to your name, face, body. Don't attach to your traits. They are all subject to change. Your body is really only on loan to you from the elements. To quote the Bunsen Chukai. The Bunsen Chukai is the line, your body is on loan from the elements. Your body's really not you. It's not the self. Your body is just a collection of things that you temporarily interact with. So don't cherish it. And then to quote Kusanoki Masashige from the Hyogo no Ki, is your body is not to be cherished. It is to be used to achieve great results. It is just temporary. Right? Even gods in etheric worlds such as heavens and hells, they're not really existing. And they too are impermanent, changing, and bound to suffering. And then finally, all mental states and all emotions are empty of an intrinsic core, and they are temporary events. And they are suffering. Do not cling to any emotion. All emotion, no matter what emotion or thought you have, no emotion, no thought is the self. Hence, the entire purpose of this video was to try and present a basic and fundamental understanding of Anatman and Shunyata that can apply pretty much across the board. So in order to do that, we had to clear away a lot of misunderstandings and misconceptions, and then replace those with a basic and fundamental understanding. So clear away the errors, present the correct information, and hopefully you walk away with a correct fundamental understanding that can be applied across the board. Of course, the topics of Anatman and emptiness can become more esoteric and complex, but then we run into the problem that with a far more complicated look, we have that problem of which ideas would actually be present in the author's life versus which of these ideas simply could not be there. So by sticking to the fundamentals, we can have a better idea of what's going on through Nojiri Jiroimon's mind without risking the possibility of adding details that probably wouldn't have been there. So again, I know that this video was long and complicated, but because Nojiri Jiroimon taught that the principle of emptiness is the thing you need to rely on, we have to make sure that you, the viewer, at least has a correct fundamental introduction to the principle of emptiness and, by extension, an Atman. All right. For those of you that made it to the end of the video, thank you very much. Please, if you have any questions or comments, please put them below. Thank you.